Call this meeting to order. It's May 21st, 2013. This is the Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Welcome all of those who are here with us at Carnegie Town Hall and those of you who are watching us live on CityLink and on SiouxFalls.org. We appreciate your participation in city government. It's good to have you all here. I think we're missing, people are still rolling in. I know folks are in the building, so we'll get started with staff report from City Clerk Lori Hogsted. City Council, Lori Hogsted, City Clerk's Office. The information I'm going to present today was a question that actually came up 2 weeks ago. Councilor Staggers had asked me about other referendum petitions that we had received in the city and that resulted in elections. And I thought it was a great question. I did some research, and here's what I found. And we'll start with the one back in 1953. And this is also up on the screen, and you each have a copy as well. But this particular referendum petition was proposing a route for Highway 38. And this resolution was referred by the citizens, and it was to provide federal aid highway improvements for about a half a mile from the north city limits to Rice Street, known as Cliff Avenue. And a vote yes would approve the referred resolution, a vote no would not. In that election, particular election, that was approved, and the yes vote prevailed, so that was the first one. Then we had one in 1957, and this dealt with kind of an interesting topic. There was an ordinance that was in place in the city stating that it would be unlawful for any on-sale intoxicating liquor dealer to give or serve or permit any person to give food or any edibles, they called it, or foodstuffs, but it would not apply to clubs. So in other words, the citizens voted, they voted no, and what no meant is that they had to uphold the ordinance and they could not serve food along with liquor. Now this would be a really interesting one if anyone knew the history of this and why this was the case, but obviously that has changed. So that one also went before the voters. 1973, we moved from liquor then onto sewer rental fees. And the city at that time had adopted an ordinance that provided for sewer rental fees and charges, methods of billing, collection, establishing a separate fund, and providing for contracts and private wells. And the citizens voted just over 4,000 votes to say no. They did not want to establish a sewer rental fee for users of the city's sanitary sewer system. And I put the question on here because sometimes it depends on how the question is worded, really reflects what the yes or no means. The next one was to do, and maybe some of us remember this, I know I do, the 9/11 hospital privileges. That was in 1991. We held a special election. And in this case, the city had adopted an ordinance that provided that a surface ambulance service must receive emergency treatment hospital privileges from, and at that time it was Sioux Valley and McKennan hospitals, prior to that ambulance service being put on the 911 system within the city limits. And that one was overwhelmingly voted no, and so that did not enact the ordinance and did not require that that a particular company, in this case, had emergency treatment hospital privileges. And then, of course, last but certainly not least was October of 1993. A special election was held, definitely the closest election we had. And this referred to the Washington Pavilion and the Hotel and Convention Center, if you remember, was a combined election, and a vote yes would approve the issuance of the bonds for a convention center and the Washington Pavilion. It passed by quite a small margin, but it did pass, and of course we now have the Pavilion and Convention Center. So just a brief history, and of course now we have the referendum on shaped places coming forward, and we'll add that to the list. So. Any questions on that? Wow, interesting. Thank you, Lori. Questions from council? Good. Okay. Thank you, Lori. Appreciate that. Moving on, report from the Public Services Committee, Tuesday, May 14th. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. At the Public Services meeting Tuesday, May 14th, we had a review of the draft of Board of Health Ordinance revisions by Jill Franken. The main discussion was the separating of the Board of Health and creating a Falls Community Health Governing Board. After discussion, that was voted to be passed on to the City Council. The second agenda item was transit fare and operations analysis. That is taking a look at our paratransit and transit services. Also recommending to reduce the service minutes or hours of the paratransit. This also will be presented to the City Council at another council meeting. From there, we had an open discussion where the sprinkler task force meeting for May 15th was discussed and made public. And that was it.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Anderson. I'd just note that item 26 on tonight's 7 o'clock agenda is that paratransit service hours resolution. So that came straight out of that committee into this group. So thank you for your report. Any questions for Councilor Anderson? Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Kenny. What's going to happen now with that sprinkler task force?
Well, right now, as I have communicated with the rest of the council, during one of the task force meetings, we found out that the state uses administrative rule to update their international building and fire codes, including the sprinkler codes. Unfortunately, by using administrative rule, there's a lot less public input and communication. And apparently there was some communication loss between the state and not only Sioux Falls, but several other cities in South Dakota as far as being compliant to state law. I would expect to be seeing the sprinkler ordinance being brought back up to the council and basically making us compliant with state law. We are also discussing some ways to encourage those smaller developers that are building affordable housing that we so desperately need, ways of helping offset adding sprinklers to those facilities, those multi-housing facilities that weren't under our current sprinkler codes and probably are not in their building plans. So at this time, we are taking a look at several ways where the city could assist and encourage these developers to continue building these affordable housing, but including sprinklers.
Is there any thought of trying to get some legislation sponsored by somebody from Sioux Falls to exempt us from this administrative rule?
There has been a discussion. I think the first thing that we would like to do is take it to the Municipal League and allow them to bring that up. I have spoken with a few state representatives and senators about taking a look at how that is approved at a state level, so there's more discussion about it. And then we also included our local council clerk is now included in that email, so that if there are any other administrative rule updates, that we'll be aware of them.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. Other questions for Councilor Anderson or for the committee? All right, good. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to City Council open discussion. Anything from Council today? Councilor Jameson.
Later tonight, under new business, item number 28, we are electing a new chair, vice chair tonight.
Yes, we are. That's set by
And
ordinance.
would this be your last informational meeting that you're chairing?
Yes, Councilor Jameson, it would be.
Well, I think it's only fair to acknowledge the service that the chair provides and the work that the chair and the vice chair do. I've certainly had the privilege to do that, and it's a lot of extra work, and it doesn't work out for everybody to provide that service to the council, but I know that Councilor Erpenbach has gone well over and beyond the work that it takes to do. So I think it's only fair that we acknowledge her in some way and thank her publicly for her service. I think it's worth doing. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, if I might, it has been a pleasure. It is something that I would hope that everyone would take the opportunity to do. It is, as someone said the other day, a look behind the curtain. There are, lots of things that happen, HR and all the things that go into keeping this body moving in the way that we want it to. And so I appreciate the opportunity, and I thank you for your acknowledgement. Moving on then, any other City Council open discussion? All right, let's move into presentations. April monthly financial report. Tracy Turback, Director of Finance. While he does that, I'm going to remind folks, we have voted, many of us have voted, we all have stickers on. Remind you that it is the school board election today until 7 o'clock. Those of you that are watching tend to be those government geeks, and I appreciate you getting out between meetings and doing your civic duties, so school board elections. All right, now go ahead, Tracy, thank you.
Good afternoon, Tracy Turback with the Finance Office with my April 30th month-end financial update for the council. As I typically do, I'll run through the some of the economic indicators that we track, and then give you a high-level overview of our city general fund year-to-date. As you know, Sioux Falls has enjoyed very favorable unemployment statistics here, particularly recently. This chart shows you the three most recent years, and including 2013 year-to-date. You can see that this year we are running better even than last year. Currently we're at, the most recent data anyway indicates that we're at 4.1% unemployment in our local MSA. That compares to a 4.7% unemployment rate 1 year ago, so that has improved. And you can see that these lines do typically drop down early in the year during the first quarter. So that is a kind of a seasonal thing that we see, but even with that, the 13 statistics look much better than 12 and particularly 2011. One additional thing I would point out that as of the March figures, we had 128,435 people working in the Sioux Falls MSA, and that's an increase from a year ago of over 3,600 people. So it's almost a 3% increase in the number of people that are working here in the Sioux Falls area. Building permits, no surprise. I think you're accustomed to seeing some really incredible numbers the last few months, and well, really much of the last half of last year, and it's just really accelerated into 2013. You can see this graphic shows you the year-to-date value of building permits issued. And the green bar represents the 2013 figures. You can see those extend well beyond even what we were seeing in 2012 year-to-date. Through April, so for 4 months of this year, the Building Services Department has issued permits valued at over $238 million. Last year at this point it was at 103.5. So it's a $135 million increase in the value of permits issued in the first 4 months of the year. That's over 130% increase from last year. So it's really just an incredibly active area, and I think you look around the community, you can see a lot of that construction happening. That certainly, again, as I've said before, bodes well for our property tax base over the next few years as those properties complete their development and construction and end up on the tax rolls. Sales tax revenues are certainly as part of the city's bread and butter in terms of providing our city services. This graphic is a rolling 12-month growth rate chart. It shows that we've been growing very steadily at right around 5% for quite some time now. At the end of April 2013, that was growing at 5.3% year over year. And that's just up slightly from a month ago when I reported to you that was at 5.2%. So that's just taken a very slight move in the positive direction. Along with that, we look at the entertainment tax revenues. which have cooled off somewhat in terms of their growth rate over the last several months. Still growing very solidly at 5.2% on a 12-month rolling basis. Last month, that was at 5.6%. So as I say, that growth rate has cooled off some, and it's really down to a level where it's tracking with our general sales tax dollars. And in the financial report, the written report that you folks receive, we've in the financial overview, we've provided some additional information on the entertainment tax revenues, kind of what type of sales are included in that, and kind of the makeup of those taxable sales. So hopefully you'll find that information interesting. Looking at the general fund on a revenue and expense year-to-date basis, comparing 2013 year-to-date with 2012. On the revenue side, through April, the general fund had $27.3 million in revenue. That compares to 21% of our budget. So through April, we've collected 21% of the revenues that we anticipated. And last year, we were also at 21% at this same point in the year. So we're tracking right along with where we were a year ago relative to our budget. On the expense side, year-to-date expenses in the general fund are a little over $37 million, which translates to 28% of our general fund budget. Last year, we were running at 30% of budget expended through the first one-third of the year. So very close to where we have historically seen our budget spend down progress. So that concludes my very brief presentation. I know you've got a full slate of other presentations, but I'd certainly entertain any questions that you have today.
Great, thank you, Tracy. Questions from council? Councilor Rolfing.
Tracy, I noticed one of the things that I always turn to is our reserves, and we're doing well, 47 million there. With the FEMA money that it appears that we're going to get, question about whether or not we should use our money or whether we should use the government's half-borrowed money from ourselves. Would it put a big strain on us if we either returned or didn't accept the money from FEMA and paid for this tree trimming that we got with this nice ice storm and paid for it ourselves?
Would it put a large strain on the city? I'm not in a position where I can really answer that at this point.
I understand we don't have the final estimates, but
That's right.
but assuming it's not a $30 million deal, if it comes in to be a reasonable amount of money, would it be something that we could take a look at maybe returning some or all of it and or not accepting it and taking care of it and let some people down in Oklahoma probably that probably need it worse than we do, or some other people maybe doing it that way?
Well, let me say this, Councilor. From the get-go, we have followed with this ice storm and the response the federal process. We have done our best to track costs in compliance with what FEMA might require if it were ultimately, which it now has been, declared as a federal disaster. And we've followed the same rules that any community in the country would do, and so we've done that. We have taken steps to try to minimize the overall cost to the city and to the state and federal government in relation to the response and cleanup from the storm. Others have asked me that same question or raised that same issue, and one of the responses that I think makes sense to me anyway is that the Sioux Falls citizens do pay federal taxes. They pay taxes into the federal government. In exchange for that, we all expect to receive services at certain times, and this is one of those times when the City of Sioux Falls, through the federal program that has been established for disasters, we've gone through the state level and the federal level, and ultimately the President has declared a disaster. So this is one of those times when the Sioux Falls taxpayers get some of those tax dollars back in the form of federal reimbursement for the additional costs that we incurred as a result of that storm. Now, from my standpoint as the city's finance director, and I think certainly all of you folks as well, have an obligation to look out for the financial best interests of the City of Sioux Falls. Other than being a taxpayer that also pays federal taxes, I don't have a particular obligation to look out for the federal government. I certainly get that people aren't happy with the way the federal government manages their money or runs their budget, and that's really, while it should be certainly on some level a concern to all of us, as city officials here, that's not really our role to take a position in. At least that's certainly my opinion. So, foregoing what very likely will be millions of dollars in assistance would not, in my opinion, serve the financial best interests of the Sioux Falls city. So I certainly would not advocate that, and I frankly don't know the answer if we can do that once a disaster is declared. I really don't know that. And I suppose another related question might be, well, what about other federal money that we receive? The city receives a lot of federal money for different programs. Are we going to forego all those federal dollars because the federal government is not managing their money properly? I mean, that will have a significant, drastic effect on our ability to provide city services if we're going to take that kind of philosophical position to the ultimate extreme. As it relates to the disaster in Oklahoma City, what we do here, I firmly believe will have no bearing on the level of assistance or help that the people down there receive from the federal government.
I would somewhat agree with you on that, other than I want to make sure you understand that what I said had no bearing on how you guys and how the administration, the mayor, handled all the intricacies of responding to what happened here. Excuse me, what happened here. It's a great job of that, and so please don't take it that way. That's not what I meant by this at all. But I just feel that we have this reserve for a reason, and if we're always going to fall back on the federal government for something, maybe we should be looking at spending more of that on doing something rather than having it around, because this, to me, this is a reserve, and this was an emergency, and we could probably better take care of this ourselves this way, rather than sort of count on the federal government to step in. And we're a positive federal drain anyway. We get more than we put in as a state of South Dakota. I think we get significantly more federal funds than what we as a state put in. So we're coming out okay on this deal anyway. So anyway, something that I probably will bring up a little bit more later on, and maybe there's philosophical difference here. Maybe we just need to look at it.
Well, one comment I might make is just to urge you to be cautious in forming a kind of a position on that issue, because at this point we don't know, and to the extent that we would deplete whatever level of reserves that would be necessary, that does financially weaken our position to deal with other disasters. And we might be Oklahoma City next week. We just don't know that when the next disaster is
exactly
coming in.
So we need to.
And so I will continue to advocate to maintain our strong reserves that we have, and to accept the help that's available to us.
I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I think the nice thing about not taking FEMA money is to display our independence, that we're an independent governmental body. But having said that, can you tell us exactly how much we have spent in complying with FEMA regulations already?
I can't tell you exactly how much we've spent at this point. As I mentioned in my email to you earlier today, we're in the process of not only tabulating what we've spent so far, but in terms of trying to estimate what the eventual run out of the cost will be for this project. And I expect in the next 2 to 3 weeks we will have a pretty good handle on that. As you know, the branch pickup effort is nearing the end. They've got a ways to go yet, but I think we're getting close to the end of that. And I think once that effort is done, I think we'll be in a much better position to provide a comprehensive estimate of what the cost will be. Now we will, even after the last branch is picked up and hauled away, we will continue to incur costs. The grinding is not an inexpensive process as well, so that process of grinding those branches up and disposing of them will go on for a number of weeks, if not months. So those costs will continue to accrue as we do that. One of the challenges that we've had in trying to get our hands around the costs is that so much of this is driven by the tonnage involved in how much is there. And so many of these branches for that first week or so were hauled and not weighed. There was no, it was just an all-out effort to clear the streets and eliminate the safety hazard. And so that effort stockpiled quite a number of branches that we don't have a handle on how much tonnage is really there. Now, since going through the competitive bid process, several days into the event, we now, all that gets weighed under FEMA requirements, and of course the grinding is also done on a per ton basis. So we've seen estimates of the tonnage that are really all over the board, so I'm not confident in any cost estimates to talk about them publicly because there've been a wide range of estimates on how much tonnage is really out there, and that really is what drives the cost.
Yeah, I think I remember reading something in the Argus that we've already spent several $100,000 just complying with FEMA regulations, but I don't know the exact number at all. But finally, can you let us know, will the City Council have any say at all in whether to accept FEMA money?
I'm not confident of just what that process is from this point forward. I do know that tomorrow is the initial briefing or meeting to kind of kick off that phase of the disaster process, that there will be state and federal officials that will brief city people and other entities here that have been affected on just what that process will be.
Okay. Councilor Anderson.
Tracy, the discussion has been, maybe moving forward and paying for something ourselves. Just to sort of jump over on something we already paid for would be our floodplain improvements that we paid for. How are those payments coming back? Are we getting paid back from the federal government on that money yet, or what's the status of that?
On the flood control improvements, the city has not received any federal payments on that.
Are they giving us money just to pay for the interest? I believe maybe the first couple of years they actually allocated us some money for interest on that.
I guess I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Jameson.
Tracy, on the explosion of growth in the community with the building permits, do you have a good idea, or can you tell me what, surely the impact of all that development, that construction activity has got to have an impact on our sales tax collection, or is there an exemption, or do you see a correlation? Do you have a way to calculate the value of trickle back to us, so to speak?
I'm not aware of any good, strong correlation. Clearly, there has to be one, but to try to quantify that, I'm not familiar with any sort of data from the state level that really gives us a good handle on that. But certainly a lot of that construction activity does translate into more sales tax dollars for the city. There's no question about that. But trying to quantify that is really a difficult proposition.
I just see it as 130% growth in the activity, that there would have to be a spike somewhere. Maybe it'll just come later. You mentioned it right on with the property tax. That's going to come pay us later.
Right.
But the sales tax, I would think, would be right on, and I just didn't know if you had a feel for that, so thank you, I guess.
Okay, Councilor Karski.
Thank you. Like Councilor Anderson, I'd written down the same question. We prepaid for a few things, one of them being the levies, another one, Lewis and Clark. Do we have a handle on what we've prepaid and what the government, the federal government, has promised to pay us back? Do we have those numbers? Is that something that could come before the fiscal committee just to let us know through that committee what we've committed based on the federal government's promise to reimburse us? Can we dig that up?
I would certainly think we could, absolutely. And maybe we can talk offline and try to pin down exactly what you're interested in, and we can work with Public Works and put together the information that you're asking about.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just expect that'll happen through fiscal committee, then you'll take care of that, Councilor Karski. Okay, any other questions from council? I just wanted to add one thing, just to restate something that Mr. Scherbeck said. You said that we don't know if or when council will have any input into whether we get the FEMA money or not. I got a couple emails today telling me I was voting on it tonight, and so I kind of did a double take on the agenda, like, really? I didn't know that we were voting on that, but we are not. And the city council is not in any time that we know of right now prepared to vote on whether we take FEMA money or not. So just to make that clear for folks that that's not on the agenda. So any other questions or comments from council? Thank you very much for your work and for your staff's work. We appreciate it, Tracy.
Thank you.
Moving on in presentations, we will go to the airport runway safety improvements. Don Kearney, Director of Parks. Dan Lettler from Sioux Falls Regional Airport. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Don Kearney with Parks and Recreation. We're certainly pleased to be able to present what I think is getting near the goal line, so to speak, on a project that we've been working on for a very, very long time. We're just really pleased to be able to be here and provide you with some additional detail. Several weeks ago, we provided a letter that Dan Lettler, Executive Director of the Airport Authority, provided to summarize the improvements to the runway safety area as well as the mitigation plan for Elmwood Golf Course. And so again, today's discussion is to just follow up with you and provide some more detail about that project, but also answer any questions that you may have about the project. Today our presentation really consists of two presenters. One will be Dan Lettler. Dan is the Executive Director of the Airport Authority, as many of you already know. But also we have with us is Kevin Norby. Kevin is the golf course architect that's been retained by the Airport Authority to work on the mitigation plan as it relates to the golf course work. We also have in the audience Mark Wiedrich. Mark is engineer with the engineering firm of Goldsmith Heck. Mark is available and certainly helpful to the whole process as well as the Airport Authority's engineer on this project, as well as Terry Comstock is in the audience with us today. Many of you probably know Terry being associated with Dakota Golf and golf in general in Sioux Falls for a long time. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan to walk you through the runway safety area improvements as well as the mitigation plan and the environmental assessment. And then we'll also, about in the middle of that presentation, turn it over to Kevin to talk about the golf course plan. And then after that, we'll be certainly available for questions. So with that, Dan Lettler.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council. Thanks for your time this afternoon to allow me to give you an update on three important issues that, as Don had mentioned, we've been working on for several years. And I think we're very close to reaching a conclusion to this effort and finding a resolution to all three issues that, as we'll get through the presentation, you'll find are really intertwined. So, but first I'd like to go back a little bit and explain how we got to the point we're at today. Several years ago, the FAA mandated that all commercial service airports have a 1,000-foot safety barrier at the end of at every runway in the event an aircraft would overrun the end of the runway, and there would be an object-free area that the aircraft could continue to move into without having more of a catastrophic event. It really became necessary and a lot of focus several years ago when a Southwest Airlines overshot the end of the runway in Chicago Midway Airport, went into an intersection and actually into a convenience store and caused some fatalities on the ground. So it became more urgent that all commercial service airports meet this mandated deadline to ensure that all runways have this 1,000-foot safety barrier. Now we've been working, we have two primary runways in Sioux Falls. Of the 4 runway ends, 3 of them are in compliance. We have a 1,000-foot safety barrier. Unfortunately, one end, the south end of runway 321, adjacent to Elmwood Golf Course is about 300 feet short of that 1,000-foot barrier. So we've been working on this issue for several years. Actually, over 2 years ago, we started an environmental assessment study to look at all the different alternatives to find the best solution to this issue. That study did generate 4 options, which I'll go into brief detail, but ultimately the one that was selected from the draft environmental assessment that's just been completed is to move the perimeter fence and road at the end of that runway into Elmwood Golf Course about 500 feet to provide the full 1,000-foot safety clearance. And here you can see an overview of the airfield. Who's in the audience anyway. On the south end of this runway, this is the approach end of runway 3. That's the area that does require correction to provide a 1,000-foot safety barrier. The aqua border here is the runway safety area that extends around and on both ends of the runway. And the next slide you'll see a little bit closer where our perimeter road and fence are within that 1,000-foot safety barrier. Also of interest, and which I'll talk about a little bit later, is a property ownership issue that we want to get resolved as well. The purple boundary is actually the current airport border, which does include about 55 acres of Elmwood Golf Course on the south and a little bit to the north end of Elmwood Golf Course. So one of the first alternatives, however, was really to do nothing. Unfortunately, that's not an option. We're required to have, by September 2014, this runway safety area corrected. If not, to be able to continue to use that, we'd have to actually shorten the runway by 500 feet. Certainly an option, but would really have a negative impact on several users. Commercial air carriers, namely Allegiant Airlines, does require the full 9,000 feet, especially on warm weather days. Cargo carriers, FedEx and UPS would also be impacted by a shorter runway. And the Air National Guard as well requires the full 9,000 feet. So many of our primary tenants of the airfield would be impacted if we shut off 500 feet of runway. And this is the alternative that's been forwarded as the selected choice to correct the runway safety area. And here a little bit closer you can see, again, the aqua line is the runway safety area. We also have an object-free area, which again extends 1,000 foot beyond the end of the runway, but is a little bit wider. Not necessarily required at this time, but if we're going to utilize this option, we want to make sure we're outside of that area as well. In the event down the road, that becomes a mandated requirement. But as you can see here, within the aqua lines, the light gray is our current perimeter road. It's well within that 1,000-foot safety barrier. We also have some air navigation equipment that would have to get moved. But this alternative would provide, in the dark gray shaded area, would be the new perimeter road and fence as it extends outside of both of those safety areas, but does certainly impact Elmwood Golf Course. And there's about 3 holes here that would be impacted because of this relocation of the fence and road. Again, that the construction cost for that particular option was about $1.2 million just to move the fence and the road. Briefly, we did have 2 other alternatives to correct the runway safety area that would actually add 500 feet of runway to the north end of runway 321. It has its own set of issues. It's not a clean resolution to this issue, and it's about $5 million. So yes, it is an option, but one that's not as desirable as moving the perimeter fence and road into Elmwood. And the last alternative to correct the runway safety area is to install a semi-hard surface. Again, it's primarily used for airports that have physical limitations to extending the runway safety area, whether they be on a mountaintop or next to a body of water. This EMAS material basically acts as a barrier. If the aircraft were to overrun, would actually fall through the surface and catch the aircraft to prevent it from going any further. but this material, this installation is over $8 million, and it's very expensive to maintain throughout time. Now, as we've went through this environmental assessment, again, as Don would testify, nothing has been easy through this process. Several years ago, when we were having our annual certification inspection, the inspector asked the airport to survey the height of the trees in Elmwood Golf Course as you approach that runway on runway 3. And over time, we have been trimming in these trees, but it's been 8 or 9 years. We did complete the survey, and we've identified almost 200 trees that do penetrate this invisible approach surface to this runway that needs to be clear of any objects, whether it's towers, buildings, trees. And these over 189 trees are identified as obstructions that need to be addressed in some manner, whether they're trimmed or removed or lighted. Rather than start a completely new environmental assessment, we actually combined both the Elmwood tree issue and our runway safety area to try to find an alternative that would address both, that would blend well together and find a solution for both issues. And here's again another overview of how many trees we're talking about and where they're at. The kind of orange oblique trapezoid surface there is the approach zone to the airport. And you can see in the red dots, these are all trees that actually currently penetrate this approach surface and need to be addressed in some manner. There's also a transitional slope surface on the side that also has penetrations, and that's where you have some of these additional trees to the west of this approach surface that also need to be addressed in some manner. So working with Tom Janza, Dakota Golf, Don Carney and his group, we solicited the assistance of Kevin Norby with Herford Norby Golf Course Architects to look at if we were to permanently address this issue by removing or trimming a majority of these trees, how would the course look and play, and how can we make these adjustments to these trees and ensure that Elmwood is as playable and better condition when we're done with it than we are today. So we did come up with, Kevin did have a plan that he's developed that would address of the 27 holes in Elmwood Golf Course, there'd be 14 holes that are specifically impacted by either the runway safety area extension or by removing trees around selected holes that would need to be moved or adjusted as from a par standpoint. The construction would also provide new greens throughout the course, not just the 14 holes, new fairway grass, a new irrigation throughout the holes that are impacted. We would remove and install a new maintenance building that's kind of right in the middle of a couple holes that need to be moved. And working with the FAA, the RSA correction, especially since it's paired with the Elmwood project, is one of the highest rated priorities within the FAA to correct this runway safety area. So funding would be provided up to 90% of the project, State of South Dakota picking up 5%, and the Airport Authority picking up the remainder of 5%. The estimates just for the Elmwood renovation are anywhere between $4 and $4.5 million, and that would be in addition to the $1.2 million that would be necessary to move the perimeter fence and road. So I have Kevin here, and he's going to actually provide a little more detail as far as what changes would be required in Elmwood Golf Course. Again, it is the preferred alternative as we go through the environmental process. And when we come back, I'll touch on some other options we looked at, and then get into the final segment, which is the property exchange that we want to talk about.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Again, my name is Kevin Norby. My company is Herford Norby Golf Architects. We're out of Chaska, Minnesota. This project for us started probably 2 years ago. Prior to that, though, we have had a relationship with the City of Sioux Falls. We worked with Don Kearney and Dakota Golf on the bunker renovations at both Elmwood and Prairie Green. And most recently, we are working with the City of Sioux Falls on the 2 clubhouse projects at Keene and Prairie Green. So when we started this project, there was really 2 primary goals. One was to come up with a routing that would leave the golf course both safe and playable, and at least as good a golf course as it is today. It's a very highly respected golf course throughout the state. It's had a number of large tournaments. It's very popular. It's very profitable. And so in that regard, we wanted to make sure that that didn't change. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that after we made the physical changes, we also provided an experience that was consistent, because the golfers will notice the difference between old greens and new fairways and old fairways. And so we needed to make sure that we didn't just make the changes on the holes that needed to be relocated or rerouted, but we actually improved the holes, the remaining holes. And I think Dan alluded to 14 holes that are directly impacted, and the remaining 13 holes have some other changes. So when you look at the plan that's in front of you, the light green areas are the areas that are, I would say, are getting fairly significant changes. We're rerouting the holes, we're moving them over, we're making changes to the location of greens or tees. The other holes that are surrounded in the darker brown or tan areas, those are holes that aren't getting any major changes. They're simply getting new grassing surfaces, new putting surfaces, so we'll still be making improvements to those, but we're not really, the golfer will come out and will essentially not notice any changes to those holes. So I will walk you through quickly a couple of things. I'm guessing you can't see the red pointer up on the screen in front of you. So as you know, there are 3 different nines. There's the East 9, the North 9, and the West 9. The West 9 and the North 9 make up what we call the championship course. It's slightly longer, slightly more challenging, and the playing conditions are just a little bit different, a little bit appeal more to the avid golfer, I would say. So I'm going to walk you through the 3 different nines. The East 9 is the 9 that you see on the right. This isn't very bright. Is the East 9 is on the right-hand side, so that includes the driving range and those holes off to the east side there. The primary change that's occurring there is that there are a lot of large oak trees and ash trees that are really nearing the end of their life expectancy, that as a result of the airport improvements and the requirements that they have, a lot of those trees will go away. And so we are planting additional trees. I think that we've got some 100 or 120 trees proposed. But what happens is, because of the configuration of those holes today, there are some fairly sharp dog legs. And when you cut the trees down, there's nothing to keep somebody from just hitting the ball basically straight from the tee to the green. If you're not a golfer, you hopefully understand what I'm talking about. And so part of this is we've straightened some of these holes, particularly hole number 1 and number 2 on the East 9. So here they're showing up actually as 11 and 12. But so we're straightening those holes out. We're lengthening those to some degree. And then we'll be going back in and we'll be regrassing, rebuilding the greens. So they'll actually get a new USGA green construction. We'll be actually regrassing the fairways so that it's a newer, more consistent turf grass. They'll get new irrigation, so there'll be a new sprinkler system, automated sprinkler system. And then one of the other things that's happening on the East 9 is that There is a new maintenance facility being proposed. Don is showing you on with the cursor. The old maintenance facility, which is located on the north 9, kind of up around number 10 and 11, that building has to be demolished and will go away in order to make room for some of the golf course improvements. So to replace that, we'll be putting a new building in that location. And I've actually got a slide of that here. So this is off again on the east 9 holes 2 and 3, 4. So there'll be a new 5,500 square foot maintenance storage facility, and then another building that will go that will be used for shop space and heated offices. So fortunately, there's nothing going on in that area right now. It's not being used for anything. It's vacant space, and so it actually incorporates. It fits into that space pretty well. So I'll walk you through 9 holes at a time. This will be fairly quick. On the east 9, essentially the big changes are that we're removing trees and rerouting some holes, primarily holes 1, 2, and 9. We'll actually be creating new holes, number 1 and 2, number 1 and 2, and hole number 8 will actually be brand new golf holes. And so there'll be holes that the golfer won't recognize as holes they've played previously. We'll also be building that new maintenance facility. That work we expect to happen actually beginning this fall. So if all goes as planned, we will build those improvements, we will complete that work, and then we will have next summer and fall for that grass to mature and to become ready to play. And once that's ready to play, we'll open those holes and move on to phase 2, which would be the north 9. And the north 9, the primary changes that occur there are that in order to accommodate the RSA expansion, we need to sort of slide a couple of holes to the west. If you want to go back, Don, for me, go back 2 slides. We need to slide one more. There you go. So we're going to take, because of the. Did I get that? So we're going to take holes 10 and 11 on the north 9, and we're going to slide those to the west or to your left in order to make room for the runway expansion. And in doing so, we end up losing hole number 17 because that area gets pinched down, and so we replace hole 17 with a new hole way up on the north end, a new par 3. So those holes will be essentially 10 and 11 will be partially new holes. They will be similar in character to the existing holes, but the new par 3 will be a new hole, distinctly new hole that the golfers will not have seen before. And we've shown this plan to the Golf Course Advisory Committee. Everybody seems excited about the idea. They seem to like the improvements. So I think this idea has been well vetted with them. So back to the North 9 slide. Maybe jump ahead there. So the changes here are a new hole, shifting holes 10 and 11 to accommodate the airport expansion, then building the new par 3 to replace number 17, and then the new 5-hole junior course. The existing junior course will go away, and the new junior course will be located down on the south end of the property. Okay, down in there. Okay. And again, we would expect this work to begin as soon as the holes, the 9 holes on the east 9 are complete and ready to play. So there'll always be 18 holes open at a time. And so again, once these holes are ready to play and have grown in, then we'll move on to the west 9. And the primary changes there are that we're building a new hole and a new hole number 6 and a new hole number 7. We're essentially flip-flopping those 2 holes. And again, this makes room for that junior course. There's some relatively minor changes to the tees and greens on holes 7, 8, and 9. primarily to ensure safety. And again, we would see these holes being ready to play in the fall of 15, and at that point we would begin construction. This work would begin in the fall of 15 after construction and grow-in on the North 9 is complete. So, so in total, what's really happening here is that we're making some changes to all of the holes. Some of them are directly impacted because we're actually building new greens or new tees or new fairways. But those that we're not directly impacting, we're actually regrassing those holes so that the playing surfaces are consistent. We'll be putting in Kentucky bluegrass fairways, which is what they have now. We'll be planting new trees. We'll be putting in asphalt cart paths where we're taking out the existing paths. And we do not intend to make any changes to the clubhouse or the parking lot or the practice facilities. So all of those existing amenities will remain intact during construction. So, okay, good.
Okay, well, like I mentioned earlier, we did include the elmwood trees and the mitigation in our environmental assessment. So we did look at other options aside from renovating Elmwood Golf Course, which is our preferred alternative. But we did look at one other option was actually providing lights throughout the golf course to be 15, could be 15 light poles with obstruction lighting throughout the areas with the current trees and that are impacting the approach surface. Certainly not aesthetically very pleasing. It's hard to camouflage 15 light poles throughout the golf course. It would only address the current situation, so trees at their current height. As trees continue to grow, those would have to be addressed. They would have to be trimmed back to their current height. And any other trees that would grow over time, again, that would start to impact the approach surfaces would have to be addressed. So certainly a less affordable option, but it's only it doesn't permanently address the trees in Elmwood Golf Course, and certainly is not a preferred alternative with the golf course management company or the Parks and Rec Department and the Golf Course Advisory Board. If we were to look at other corrections for the runway safety area, whether we had to look to go to the north and add on to the runway, or if we installed the EMAS material, we still would have to address the trees and mitigate the tree obstructions, and that's where we would go back and look at the lighting option to pair those two alternatives together. It wouldn't be something that the FAA would approve, spending $5 million to add on to the north end of the runway and $4.5 million to renovate the golf course. It would be paired with the lighting option to correct that. So, and the last topic I wanted to discuss with you and how it's all intertwined is a property issue that's been in existence since the Airport Authority was created. In 1986, when the Airport Authority was established, the city transferred all the property that the airport needed to run the airport. During that transition, there were some acres that were included within Elmwood Golf Course that actually are part of the airport. And we'll flip the next slide and you'll kind of see some of that I pointed out earlier. About 55 acres of Elmwood Golf Course that is technically a part of the Airport Authority. If we went forward with the RSA correction and moving the perimeter fence and road, we would actually need 2.7 acres transferred to the airport to accomplish that transaction. So, you know, as all part and parcel of all three issues here, we're trying to address those all at once, and we've worked with many different departments at the city, Shack at Appraisals, Goldsmith Heck, and looking at valuing property and coming up with a plan that would provide essentially an even exchange of property values between the city and the Airport Authority. From this slide, you can see on the south end, again, the areas shaded in blue are currently owned by the Airport Authority. And so, and my pointer here. In those areas in blue, they're currently, as Airport Authority property. We want to get that transferred back to the city. And then in the area shaded in red, the 2.7 acres, their little sliver, is the property that the airport would need to complete that RSA correction. Because this is technically airport property, the FAA has guidelines for relinquishing property that any exchange, the airport would have to at least come out equal in that transaction, if not ahead of the game. Obviously, we don't want this to involve any kind of transfer of funds, so we're looking for ways to change the chess pieces so that all the dollars work together. So if we only looked at the Elmwood area of this map, the property exchange, the property transferred to the city is about 55 acres. What the airport would gain in exchange in the light green shaded area are permanent approach zone easements to protect that airspace. And there is a significant value associated with that, again, established with Shackett appraisals. But if we only dealt with this part of the field, the Airport Authority would be in the negative in that exchange. So we look to the other end of the runway, city-owned property, to provide the permanent easements on that end. And again, to make the whole deal come out dollar-wise, we would transfer another 9 acres on the north end of the field back to the city to make the exchange come out fairly even. And the next slide is just a little close-up view of the Elmwood area. Again, the area shaded in blue would be transferred from the airport back to the city to clean all that up. Again, we would require 2.7 acres to move our fence and road. And then the areas shaded in green would be the areas that are covered. That's all the approach surfaces and runway protection zone areas that would be protected by the approach zone easement. And the last slide just summarizes that transaction. It's an exchange of about $1.8 million in value. And in the end, the airport does come out a little bit ahead, about $4,000 in value. But certainly the amount of land that the city would acquire is considerably more than what the airport would. So it's a lot of soul searching to come up to try to slice and dice this transaction so that we clean it all up, that the city owns the property that they should, but that there's an equal value involved with the exchange. So the final steps, again, we have issued a final draft report of the environmental assessment. It's been out for public review for over a month now. We had a public meeting last week to again solicit public comment, any concerns that they might have regarding the RSA correction or the changes to Elmwood Golf Course. We actually just met with the Parks and Rec board a few hours ago, and they did approve the draft environmental assessment as well. So they're on board with the changes to Elmwood Golf Course. We have also drafted a memorandum of understanding between the airport and the city, which basically provides the framework from what we discussed this afternoon. It would highlights the correction to the runway safety area, which is moving into Elmwood Golf Course, highlights the 3-year phase process of renovating Elmwood Golf Course, and then finally supports the property exchange that was identified earlier. At some point, if we move forward and the EA is adopted, we'll be back before the City Council and have you formally approve the transfer of property between the city and the airport. But again, if we kind of meet our tight time schedule here, we hope to have a final report to the FAA by mid-June and have their final approval on that document to allow us to move forward with the actual development of design and bidding those documents that would correct the runway safety area and the changes to Elmwood Golf Course. Complete the land exchange late this summer. And in order to receive funding, The federal fiscal year ends in September. All of the airport improvement funds that are available need to be allocated usually by the end of August. So, you know, the urgency of finalizing this EA report, having the FAA approve it so they can move forward then and secure funding for these options. The RSA, there is a tighter pool of money. FAA has actually utilized some of these capital funds to staff airport towers, but the runway safety area improvements, again, it's not very notable, but one of the last airports in the country to really correct the runway safety area. So it has the highest priority for funding. So we're very confident in getting the funds to get this work accomplished. So again, we touched on the phasing plan, if that is the course that's selected to renovate Elmwood Golf Course. Again, would hopefully start this fall and be a 3-phase project over the next 3 years to ensure that at least 18 holes are available for play during this construction. So, okay, with that, these guys can answer all the questions, but go ahead.
Thank you all. Questions from council. Councilor Karski.
Thank you. My question's, I guess, probably more park board related, so if you don't mind. Great presentation, thank you. Don, 2 things. First off, there had been open discussion in the past about a hotel at the golf course. It looks like the room with this plan, that goes away. Is that a correct assumption?
No, I don't think it does. We do think that there's still an opportunity to have a hotel sited on the property somewhere. The thing that we're working around is trying to accommodate the concerns from the Air National Guard and the Airport Authority about where that's located, so it's not right off the end of the runway, to Dan's safety concerns that he's trying to address. So we're just trying to find a location on that site that would accommodate that. So that's certainly still in play.
Okay. And the second question, on the land swap, I think there was 16 acres on the north end. Is that correct?
On the north end, there was 9 acres that would transfer.
Okay. And it's that small parcel of land, kind of the discussion that what I got out of that is that was put in there to kind of make things come out.
To even the dollars.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Do you have use for that land? Do you have plans for that land? I mean, is this land that can benefit us in any way from the parks side? Or does that land go to the airport? Do I have it backwards?
No, that goes to the city. Actually, it's used quite often now as they dredge the channel. All the sediment the city takes from the channel is stored there. So the city actually already uses it for some of their needs. So, and when it's not used in that manner, it's a hay ground. We have a farmer that hays that ground. The adjoining parcel just to the left of that, it actually is city property. So it evens that area out quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you.
And if I could, I might just add that Trent Lubers and Mark Cotter in Public Works have been involved in those discussions because it's actually an asset of Public Works and not ours. And so, to your point, we really probably wouldn't have a use for it, but Public Works does.
Okay. Councilor Karski, or not Karski, sorry. Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I was wondering about the easement. Why an easement? Why don't we just give you the land? Because they're right at the end of the runway, and it's hard to see that land is really going to be very useful in the future, except for the airport. So why not just give you the land instead of having an easement?
Well, if we owned the land and it was still used as a golf course, then the FAA would require that we have some revenue from that. So if it continued to be used as a golf course, then we would have to receive rent revenue for the use of having a golf course on that property, which is really kind of another incentive to get this corrected. Otherwise, the FAA, and we hear this quite often, is adamant that we get this whole issue corrected. Otherwise, we should be collecting rent for the acres that are used as a golf course.
But are we anticipating using that as part of the golf course?
This will continue to be used as a golf course.
I mean,
if we own the property that the golf course sits on, it's not used for any aeronautical purposes. It's actually used for revenue generation for golfing. So we would have to have rent for the use of that.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, these easements that, we're anticipating giving you. That's not part of the golf course at this time, is it?
Pretty much the majority of the green area that you see is part of Elmwood Golf Course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And also, one other question I do have is trying to figure out the cost the city is going to be obligated for. It looks like we're at least going to be obligated for $220,000, but
no, that's the airport authority would pay that portion. The city isn't.
That was 5%, wasn't it?
And that's what the city.
And I think we had 5%.
No, the city is not paying for any
Whole
of the
state,
improvements,
okay.
right.
Do you have any idea? I'm sure we are going to be paying some money. How much money would be involved on the part of the city?
Well, at this point, there is no city money involved in the renovations. The only funds that would be required were on those 13 holes where we're only going to replace the greens and the fairways to make sure they all play the same. If the city wants to replace the irrigation in those areas, then that would be a cost the city would have to bear if they chose to do that. Of the other 14 holes that are being realigned and moved, new irrigation, infrastructure, cart paths, all of that's being part of the project.
So, Don, do you know how much that would incur on the part of the city?
Well, there's two pieces of costs associated with this project. One is the direct costs, the actual physical movement of holes that are being driven by the airport improvements. But there are some other indirect costs that, for example, as we discussed the project, we identified that if there was 7 out of the 9 holes on a particular 9 that were going to get renovated as a result of the project, and there were 2 other holes that remain that were indirect costs and not eligible for the project. We anticipate that through the Dakota Golf Improvement Fund, the 10% that we receive off the proceeds of the gross revenues of the golf courses, we would use those dollars to do the other 2 holes, for example. And so we're not asking for any sales tax dollars or CIP dollars to fund those ineligible costs through the FAA.
So we're not anticipating any city tax dollars for this at all?
Correct.
Okay. That's good. Thank you very much.
That's real good.
Okay. Councilor Jameson.
Right, I don't want to see us sell Elmwood either. I think we need that. I'd rather buy another course if I could. But and as well, in the golf course changes, I think for the council to better understand those changes, we really need to go and experience that course firsthand with the golf club in our hand. Maybe a refreshment.
Drive the car.
To really appreciate it, but that all looks good. I mean, I'm no designer, but I can appreciate the work that's going in to get them lined up and have a good experience at Elmwood. So I think that's done well. My only concern would be on that permanent approach zone easement, I think it's referred to. And Councilor Karski brought up the issue at the hotel. I've certainly heard of the issues as well, that certainly not a good place to put a bunch of people at the end of a runway. But do we know, does the permanent approach zone easement restrict the city in some fashion, or what those easements restrictions are?
First we'll look at this slide, then we'll go back to the golf course layout. But in the yes and no. I guess in the dark shaded areas, that easement, that's our runway protection zone. And in that area, and one reason we're moving the maintenance building as well, we really don't want any objects in that area, any buildings or structures of any kind. So that would have more limitations on what could be constructed in that area. In the light green area, that approach zone easement, again, that's primarily just a height restriction. So again, as you go further away from the course, further south that you go, the higher building that you could have. So, I think initially when the hotel was proposed, it was really right under the flight path, and both the Air National Guard and the airport had some serious concerns about being right in that area. Since then, we've had some other discussions, and actually realign the course a little bit from some of the earlier plans and renovations to, if it were to happen, and someone came to the city right off of Kiwanis, yeah, Western, a little loop here. There's currently a maintenance building, but that would be an area far enough away from some of these protection zones that if that were an option down the road and the city wanted to pursue that with the developer, that site would be available for a future hotel. Again, from a noise standpoint, we would have some concerns, and we'd want some assurances that if a developer built a hotel there, that he wouldn't come back after the airport a year later and said, hey, I don't have any guests because it's too noisy. But from a safety standpoint, it would be far enough to the east not as much of a concern as what the original proposal was.
If I could, the other property owners that are along Russell there, are they beyond the city zone? To ask the city zone property, are there other properties affected by the trapezoid or whatever you used for?
No, again, the further away you go, the higher the safety zone becomes. It's a 50-to-1 slope, so the further away you go, the less of an issue it is. But certainly, if you have a fairly tall structure, it still can be a concern. But the buildings that are along Russell there now are outside of that safety.
So all the revisions that we would be talking about would just be regarding city-owned property only. No other property owners would be affected.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions from council? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your work.
Thanks for your
Look
time.
forward to the next steps. Moving on in our agenda, we're looking at the rural metro ambulance rates. Tim Rave from Rural Metro Ambulance. Welcome. Jen, just hand it, we can pass them down.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Tim Rave, Operations Manager at Rural Metro Ambulance. Good to be back in front of the council. After that last presentation, I can assure you I'd probably rather be golfing. So, I guess you wanted me to come today to briefly just discuss the process, and then I have in the document I handed out the updated rates for 2013. So, my first part of the presentation, or my presentation, will be brief, and certainly stand by for any questions or comments afterwards. In 2007, in the renegotiated contract between the City of Sioux Falls, the REMSA, or the Regional EMS Authority, and Rural Metro Ambulance, it was put in there that the rate structure would be adjusted annually on the date of the contract, which is 5/21, and that time was 2008 would be the first time. In there it was agreed that the amount equal to the United States Department of Labor, the Midwest Medical Care CPI to be specific, or 4%, whichever is lower, would be the annual rate increase. We would bring forward the research, and you can see I've attached behind this cover sheet last year's, or what we used for this year's rate increase, Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you go back to page 3 on that document, you can see there's a highlighted section towards the bottom third of the page. It says medical care services, and that was 3.9%, and that was the rate that went to the EMS Authority this year. They confirmed that that was a legitimate number. For the Midwest, that was the annual rate of increase, and then the EMS Authority at their April meeting approved that as being the appropriate amount to raise the rate for this next year. So, and you can see on the back of this page I included, and I can run through those briefly just so they make sense. Under description there, you can see it says Bls Non-Emergency, and then down the row. Bls Non-Emergency would be, let's say, that's our more out-of-town ground trip. So something that's scheduled for, let's say, tomorrow, going to Sheldon, Iowa, and really no needs for the patient. Basically, we bring the cot in, place the patient on the cot, and position of comfort and transport them to Sheldon, probably to a long-term care facility would be most common. Bls Emergency is a call that is basically that same care level, but on a more urgent basis. Thank you, Joe. On a more urgent basis. And that would be one of our local nursing homes call. Elderly patient has fallen. We go over there immediately and then transfer the patient to the hospital, but no care really other than placing the patient on the cot and transporting to a facility. Als Non-Emergency, basically the same as a Bls Non-Emergency in the scheduled aspect, but would require some level of care, and that would be maybe an IV, maybe a cardiac monitor, those types of items. Als Emergency then would be basically what we would all consider a 911 call. You call 911, we come, provide that same level of care in an emergent, immediate fashion. And an ALS2 is just an upgrade to that, and that is the care that I just described along with at least 2 medications. So maybe that's a nitroglycerin and aspirin and morphine for chest pain would be a good example of an ALS2. That'd be an IV, cardiac monitor, oxygen, et cetera. So that briefly, and then mileage, I think it's important to note, I didn't put it in there, I apologize, but that's loaded miles. We don't bill for miles to a call. It's only when the patient is on, and I would say a good average in the city is about 3 miles, loaded miles. So that's from where the call originates to wherever the destination is, mostly the hospitals. So, I guess that ends my formal part of the presentation. It really was, I was not involved in that contractual negotiation at the time, but that has been the process we followed since 2008 would have been the first year where that rate increase was looked at on an annual basis. Prior to that, it had gone before the city council, but at the time, as I recall, it was all parties agreed that, well, we know that cost goes up as long as it's set within a reasonable amount based on a defined number, that all parties involved at the time were comfortable with that, and that has worked, I think, fairly well to this point. So,
okay. Thank you, Tim. We appreciate the report. This is basically a report of those rate increases as agreed to in the contract. Questions then from council. I have Councilor Karski and then Staggers.
Mr. Rave, I guess from looking at this chart that you provided us, I'd get the impression that if I were to call and an ambulance was dispatched, that I'd probably pay $1,100 to have that ambulance come to my house, plus mileage, and take me to whatever hospital I was going to. But what is the average amount billed? I mean, that's just the basic cost. I mean, depending on the services that are provided, that type of thing, it can go up substantially, I would imagine.
Madam Chairman, no, actually not. Backing up just a little bit, I think more realistically, most of the calls we run would typically fall in that Bls Emergency or the Als Emergency category. Again, to get to the ALS2, it would have to be, for example, patient has a seizure. We do lots of seizure calls, lots of diabetic calls, low blood sugar. That's just an IV and 1 medication. And that's a very frequent call. Chest pains are frequent, but not in that category of a seizure, diabetic, and just general aches and pains. I fell down, hurt my hip. I fell down, broke my leg. Again, this is the charge. We don't stack that. We bundle bill. This is the bill right here. So I can't go, I'm going to give oxygen and we'll, ding you for another $100. I'm going to put on a tourniquet. There's $250 for a tourniquet. That's not how billing works. I mean, this is the bill. So
okay.
I hope that answered your question. It's not, you can't, mileage, yes, but anything within the city limits, typically you're in that 3 to maybe 4, but 2.5 to 3 miles of loaded mile charge.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Tim, one way to kind of check on rates is with competition, but we don't have competition in Sioux Falls at all. The nearest competition would be in Brandon with MedStar. My understanding, MedStar is cheaper. Is that true or false?
Madam Chairman, to be honest with you, Counselor, I don't know what they charge. The only only thing I could compare it to is we recently bid a contract in Pier. And I can tell you that and I don't remember the numbers exactly, I could get them if you want them, but when our competition that actually got the contract, got the bid, they were significantly higher than we were, and that was in Pier, South Dakota. So
why would they pick MedStar if they have a higher rate?
they didn't actually pick AMR.
Oh, somebody else, AMR.
Yes, yeah. So I can tell you, we don't price shop because it's not a good way to do that type of business. But I can tell you we're commensurate. If you called Mankato, if you called Marshall, Minnesota, you went up to the cities, you went to Omaha, we would be commensurate with most of the services. Some would be higher, we would be lower than some. So,
thank you.
Good, thank you. Other questions from council? Well, that was easy.
It was.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your work. Brings us to the end of this agenda. We do have a committee meeting following this. The Land Use Committee will be meeting. I'm going to adjourn this meeting. That meeting will start in about 10 minutes. That would be at 5:35 by the Carnegie clock. So this meeting is adjourned.